Gary Sanchez. That's who we are putting here for one of the best free agents remaining. Gary Sanchez, a catcher. It could just by that, just that alone could be that needed by premium. I say catcher lightly, I should say. However, Gary Sanchez had some stints in New York. We all know about that. And then obviously the trade over to Minnesota with a stint last season was below a 1 WAR, 0.9 WAR in 419 at bats, only 16 home runs, and a 205 batting average, just over that Mendoza line. Obviously had his struggles. However, there are some teams in the MLB, especially in the National League, that I can really point to that need some catching help. What is your thoughts on Gary Sanchez? Do you think that he can get back to his offensive production that we saw when he was in the Baby Bombers division, right, with the Yankees? Or is this the Gary Sanchez we're going to see for the next couple of years, and maybe he becomes a role player on an MLB squad?
Well, I think first of all, like when you're talking about Gary Sanchez, I think you have to kind of jog your memory, right? Because the Gary Sanchez that I think a lot of us have in our minds hasn't existed since 2016, 2017. And it's funny, I'm looking here, his last like really good season, 2019 with being the exception, but every year other than that, he's actually got a negative offense value. I'm looking at Fangraphs here. So his bat hasn't even been as good as I think the memory of his bat, I guess, is. So that's the first thing I would say. It's actually kind of surprising. I'm surprised that he's actually still only 30 as well. We've been hearing about him for a long time, and he was supposed to be the guy in New York behind the plate, and it just hasn't worked out. And of course, his defense is questionable. I don't think I recall watching a catcher miss as many balls as I've seen Gary Sanchez miss, and it's not like balls in the dirt that are pretty tricky. This is just whiffing on it, right? So what Gary Sanchez brings to the table is going to be really interesting this coming year. He's going to strike out a lot. He'll hit you some double-digit home runs. There's some power, but this is definitely a case of a guy with, I guess, maybe one really good tool that is kind of running out of power.
Yeah, we saw him he is an all-star. We had seen that at some points. He was in the Rookie of the Year contention, but that was, like you said, 2016. 2019, it's hard for me to give people a lot of credit for that year because it feels like that was just a crazy year for a lot of players with the juice, with the balls being juiced and things like that. So I feel like those stats are always just a little bit saturated, in my opinion. But yeah, 2019 was his best year in the last 4. So that's something just to keep in mind. He really has struggled ever since then. However, I see a need for Gary Sanchez, and I am screaming the San Francisco Giants. We kind of talked about that in the NL West preview. Hey, we talked about it in NL West preview.
Yeah.
Joey Bart is really their only guy on the roster on their 40-man right now. And do you trust Joey Bart to be your everyday catcher? I think he has the potential to be that top guy that you thought he was. He was a top prospect in your system for a very long time, but he still has a lot to learn. I feel he is pushed into that role a lot faster than need be with the retirement of Buster Posey. You give Gary Sanchez a spot in there, maybe as a role player, maybe as a DH more than anything to trust his bat. But if you have to give Bart an off day, you can rely on Sanchez to catch and have at least a decent game, you could hope, right? So that's where I think he fits. What about you?
And when you said the Giants, I actually laughed because that I've got the Giants written down. Another team I thought maybe like Miami could use, some offensive production from the catching position. And I also wrote down maybe the Rockies because why not? Like, what else are they doing? And Diaz as well is kind of, struggled with the bat a bit as well. But I think I've landed on the Giants just simply because of this conversation we've already had on a previous episode about Joey Bart. Not to say that it's like Gary Sanchez is the guy to mentor Joey Bart or anything like that. It's just in case, I think is what I settled on. So I think San Francisco is a good spot for him. He's going to need a team that has some DH at bats, some catching at bats, and he may be looking at a minor league deal.
Yeah, which is crazy to hear
I
after
know.
a player like Gary Sanchez, being a former All-Star, Silver Slugger. I mean, we're talking a guy who has one of the longest home runs last season. The Colorado Rockies makes a very interesting point because he can hit the long ball. In Colorado,
Hmm.
you can do that there. So maybe if Monfort is interested in trying to get to that 500 ball he says he wants to get to, maybe he goes ahead and spends that money for Gary Sanchez. He's not going to have to pay too much though.